Thanks very much, Shelley.
The drive for cleaner motoring has resulted in modern cars emitting far less fumes, but the knock-on effect of that is that people are paying less in road tax.
So one idea being suggested by ministers for discussion is a dual road tax, which would mean you'd pay less if you agreed to stay off the motorways and major roads. Charlotte Leeming has been looking at the options.
The two-tier plan is just one road tax reform the government is looking at. The Treasury faces a budget shortfall created by motorists switching to cars that incur lower vehicle excise duty. Two rates would apply, a lower tier for users of small roads and a higher charge for people driving on motorways and other major routes. Cameras using number plate recognition would catch anyone using trunk roads without paying the higher rate. This is what drivers in Leeds think of the idea.
I think the road tax is expensive enough and we shouldn't have to pay any more, and we should have decent roads without potholes in.
We don't use the motorway that much really, so I don't think it would make much difference to us, but I suppose it would make a big difference to people that need to use the motorways in business and things like that.
It's going to make it more difficult, isn't it? But then the cost of petrol and cost of travel anyway is very expensive, isn't it?
Some motoring groups say as many as a third of drivers could be priced off motorways under a two-tier system. The government's said at this stage it's examining a number of different ways it can secure investment in the road network to increase capacity and to boost economic growth.
Well, to try to work out just what this would mean for motorists, we're joined now by motoring journalist Amanda Stretton and the RAC's David Bizley. I should also say we have had a lot of comments, as you can imagine, both on this. Good morning. Morning to you both.
Good morning.
Should we just start with the sort of basics here? How do you think it could work? So the idea being that you pay less if you don't take the A roads and motorways. Is that a workable idea, in your view?
It's workable in practical terms. But it's hugely unfair to those motorists who only want to use the motorways on the odd occasion.
Right.
They pay exactly the same as someone who uses it every day to get to work, and that doesn't seem to us to be a reasonable way forward.
Amanda, are you for or against?
Well, I'm for a reform because I think actually the way it is at the moment, it doesn't work. It's not fair, and I think for people, I mean, in my personal situation, I have 2 children, I have a very big dog, I have a very big car, I get taxed a huge amount. And on a weekly basis, the majority of my driving is just driving my children hither and thither and various other domestic chores. And I pay an awful lot. Now, I don't think that's necessarily fair either.
Well, you could have a smaller car.
Well, I could, but then I would have to either get rid of the children or the dog. So I think as a system, I think the system's flawed. I think the proposed system is actually also flawed because I don't think that pushing traffic onto A roads is actually going to solve the problem either. But I do think maybe pay as you go on a mileage basis, I think that possibly, but then that has to exclude commercial vehicles because I don't think anybody needs to pay any more for their basic provisions and their foods.
I mean, the one thing that's clear, it's a very complicated idea, isn't it? Lee says it's a stupid idea. It would clog up the minor roads while leaving the speedy routes free for the better off. Do you think that's what would happen, David, that lots of people think, I'm not paying extra to go on the major roads, I'm just going to drive on the other roads?
I'm sure that would happen, yes. And you'd find there would be pockets around motorway junctions and in roads parallel to motorway that would clog up very badly. I mean, motorists already pay around £45 billion a year in taxation. That's something like 4 times as much as is spent on the road network, its maintenance, its development. So we'd want to see any additional taxes ring-fenced to ensure they were spent on the roads. I do think a pay-as-you-drive solution is a lot better. It's, if you like, the least unattractive option to fund.
If you're talking about charging more for motorways, and just for motorways alone, let alone main roads, the number recognition camera work that would be needed for that would be enormous, surely. I mean, it cost.
Well, they're talking of subcontracting that out to other companies, which again just causes no end of problems. And I think actually as a system that would be flawed. I mean, I just think the most simple way is the pay-as-you-go. But then I do think that has to exclude the commercial vehicles.
I mean, many people make the point that you kind of already do pay as you go because you're paying quite a lot of duty, aren't you, on every time you fill up your car?
Well, I think, I mean, the amount of duty you pay is ridiculous. I mean, vehicle excise duty alone is £6 billion. And, you know, the current road spend is roughly £1.5 billion. That's new roads. Then you've got road maintenance, double that, maybe a little bit more. we know that there's an awful lot more money going into the Treasury from the motorist than is actually being spent on the roads. And I think transparency is actually the key, which is why a pay-as-you-go method would be the fairest. I think, though, the underlying factor is that any government changes never result in people being better
When we
off.
say pay-as-you-go, though, you're talking about checking people's mileometers every year to see how many miles they've actually driven on all sorts of roads.
I think that's the fairest. That's the only way you can actually
So when
make
you
it
go and
fair.
get your MOT, they can check it, and
Yeah.
that would be simpler, wouldn't it?
It would be simpler. It would be quite complex to manage. You could go for a much simpler system, similar to the congestion charging system in London, for example, where you paid a fixed daily fee to use the motorway network. That would be simpler to administer. And you could do that with the number plate recognition cameras as well.
But you'd have to have a camera on every single exit or every single entry ramp onto the motorways, onto every motorway.
You'd have to have sufficient to have a high probability of picking people up who didn't pay, yes.
Some people are delighted by the idea. Karen says, great idea, really, dual road tax. We don't have motorways in Cornwall. So, you know, for some people, it would work out, the system, wouldn't it?
It's a good point. And I mean, you know, for some people, like myself on a normal basis, I don't use the motorways at all. You know, so I'd be quite happy.
Simon says they have a special fee to use the motorways every year in Switzerland. Is that the case? And does it work?
Yes.
It works after a fashion, yes. You know, there are different tax regimes in each country. We pay far more in terms of our fuel duty than others do around Europe, and therefore you have to look at the total tax picture. And frankly, the current tax regime has run its course. People are driving fewer miles, and government are putting up fuel duty. They're driving more fuel-efficient vehicles. And we could really do with a complete overhaul of the taxation system, not this tinkering at the edges.
Which Amanda's obviously agreeing. Amanda, somebody, I think it was on Twitter, suggested that you mentioned that your major driving is the school run, etc. And of course, you know, that is a large part of the congestion problems, that people like you get taxed more.
Absolutely. And
you say?
I say that the system is fundamentally flawed. There is no, you know, as we've just heard, what the government have done is they've introduced this phenomenally complicated tiered system of road tax that we have at the moment. And then all that happens is over the last 5 years, the manufacturers have brought out more fuel-efficient cars.
And find a way around it.
Therefore, the road tax revenue goes down, and therefore they just have to find other ways to increase the revenues and tax us more.
Tell you one thing, there's a lot of mileage still in this debate, wouldn't you say?
Certainly.
We're never going to be better off, are we?
Thank you both very much.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your emails and tweets, etc. Gator says the proposed road tax scheme is just another money-making measure from fines. Setting it up will be expensive too, not logical. Thank you. You can keep sending them in. We'll try and read some more later.
14 minutes to 8, this is Breakfast. These are the main stories this morning. At least 13 people are thought to have died overnight as the superstorm Sandy brought flooding, hurricane-force winds and heavy rain to the east coast of the United States and Canada.
Women offered breast screening in the UK will be given new information about the risks and the benefits after scientists concluded that thousands of patients have unnecessary treatment each year.
Also on the programme this morning, Kerry Needham. Her son, Ben, went missing as a toddler on the Greek island of Kos in 1991. She says she'll never give up looking for her son.